Thank you for joining us. My name is Nicki, and I'm going to get us kicked off. So what we want to do as we go into today's webinar is we want to answer just a few questions for you. So this is what our agenda looks like. We want to answer the question, why did we create a leadership development system? If you think about the billions of dollars that are out there that are invested in this thing we call leadership development, it would make one wonder, why do we think we're doing something different? Why did we even decide to create a leadership development system? We want to answer that for you today. And why did we focus on clarity? It's a really specific focus, and we think it's a really important focus. So we want to answer the question as to why we selected that as our target, clarity. We want to help you understand what is clarity-based leadership. We've got, again, it's a system, and we want to make sure that you walk away understanding what that is. And then in our next steps, we'll just leave you with some takeaways, some next steps that you can take even if you never engage with us, or some next steps you can take if you're interested in learning more about this clarity-based leadership system. Okay. So clarity-based leadership, here's the definition. It's a leadership system that equips leaders to create cultures of clarity where people are engaged, developed, and fulfilled. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the word cultures. Notice that we did not say culture of clarity. And when we say cultures in the plural form, we're not talking about multiple organizations. We are talking about your organization, just one organization, because here's what we know. Within every organization, you may have this macro culture. Maybe you've established this umbrella of what you want your organization to be like, but within your organization are these micro cultures. Every team has a different culture. Every shift may have a different culture. And we can even drill that down even deeper and say there's a specific culture between the leader and the individual on the team. So we believe that when we drill down into organizations, there are multiple cultures, and within each of those, we want to create clarity. So what we did is we wrote a book, and the public release date is on June 7th. You can scan the QR code to learn a little more. You can even order it now if you would like. But the book is called Leading to the One, and it is focused on this idea of creating cultures of clarity where people are engaged, developed, and fulfilled. And you'll learn today that the leading to the one concept is actually one component within the clarity-based leadership system. All right, so at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Bob, and we're going to go cameras off, and he's going to start answering some of the questions that are on our agenda today.
Thanks, Nicki. Great to be with everybody this morning. And so as Nicki said, we're going to answer a number of questions for you today and kind of walk you through the mindset of how we got to this specific place and why we created what we created. But before we do that, one of the things we always talk with our clients about, or a prospective client, is this concept of unused human capacity. You'll notice on this diagram, this is a mock-up of a profit and loss statement. And nowhere in our typical P&L statements do we see a line item for unused human capacity. And we'll ask business leaders this frequently. Do you have a metric that measures the unused human capacity in your organization? And it's really interesting because without fail, they all say no. It's actually not even a generally accepted accounting principle to be able to measure that, and difficult to measure. But if you were to ask them, do you have it in your organization? They always answer yes. Somehow intuitively, we know there's unused capacity in the organization around our human capital. Now, if we look at our capital equipment, it's a different story. If we have a machine, if we're in manufacturing and we're making something, and that machine is at, let's say, 50% capacity, we know what happens to the profit of our organization if we can get that machine to 85% capacity. We know what that drops to our bottom line. We believe the same thing is true with human beings. There is extra capacity there, and if we could tap into that, it actually can make our organizations more profitable, and maybe even more importantly, make the human being more profitable because they're going to be more fulfilled. The challenge is human beings are pretty complex. Machines, oftentimes with some tools and a wrench, you can fix some things. But human beings aren't that way. Human beings require great leaders to really help maximize that human capacity. Or imagine it another way. Think of your iPhone, for an example, and the battery life icon. When your battery starts to drain and you see what percentage you're at, imagine if you could see the employees in your organization the same way. You could see that who is at 80% of capacity and who might be at 5% of capacity. It would be amazing if we could see that. We actually think that's possible. There's not an icon for that, but we believe in this system, leaders will be able to more accurately assess where their people are and actually help them through this process. Now, I want you to stop for a minute, and I want you to look at this picture of a bridge. And I'll stop talking and just look at the landscape, and I want you to just think through what you're seeing here. At first glance, when we bring this picture up during training sessions, at first glance, it looks like, man, they built the bridge in the wrong place. Or why is this bridge there? Or some people say it's a bridge to nowhere, or it's a bridge that's not serving its purpose, is maybe one of my favorite ones. There's an interesting backstory to this. Some of you may know it. It's becoming more and more popular, but this bridge actually is in Honduras. And the Honduran government hired a Japanese engineering firm to design and build a bridge that could withstand a hurricane. And so that's what they did. They built a bridge that would withstand a hurricane. Oddly enough, shortly after completion of this bridge, a hurricane did hit Honduras. And sadly, there was a lot of damage. Now, interestingly enough, the bridge withstood the hurricane, except for maybe some on-ramps and some roads and things like that. But the main structure of the bridge survived. However, what they didn't account for was the river moved. And that oftentimes happens in landscape, in environment, that a storm comes through and the route of the river gets reshifted. And so that's what happened in this particular case. They have since finished the bridge. It now does go over the river. But it is an interesting story. And so you might ask, well, why is that so important to us? Well, it answers one of the reasons why we felt the need to create a leadership development system. You see, what we see out there is mostly content. It's very rare that you will find a company that has a leadership system. So in other words, Nicki mentioned the massive size of our competition, the billions of dollars. I just read an article the other day, $60 billion in this country spent on leadership training and development. It's a massive space. And we'll talk a little bit later about the effectiveness of that space and whether it is effective right now. But one of the reasons we did this is because we want to challenge the mindsets of the leaders. We actually believe our greatest competition won't be other companies in this space. We actually think our greatest competition is going to be in the mind of the leader. We have to start to see things differently. The landscape and the environment around us has changed drastically over the last 5 to 7 years. And if we don't reshape who we are as a leader, we will end up looking like this bridge. We'll be standing there strong because we've built our leadership methodology the way that's worked for us the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but we really won't be able to serve our purpose as a leader, much like this bridge. And so that's the challenge that we put out to you today is this isn't really about learning something new. It's about becoming a new type of leader. And I want you to think about that statement for a second. This is not about learning content. This is about becoming a different type of leader in the environment that we live in today. We spend time really tracking 4 different things. We spend time in the current state of the world. We spend time thinking about leaders and leadership, or even what's going on in the world of the employee right now, and also what's happening in the development space. So these are 4 currents, as we call them, that we're paying attention to. And it's really what kind of led to the development of our system. And we're going to spend time on number 1, 2, and 4 today. We don't have time to go deep into these, so we're going to kind of pass over them pretty quickly. And so one of the things that we talk about is the word VUCA. Now, the original word VUCA, and most of you have probably heard this by now, is VUCA, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We added a second C to it to add the word complicated. But the word VUCA itself traces its origins back to Warren Bennis and some others in the late 1980s who developed this term. It then became popularized too by the U.S. Army War College, who used it to describe what a world would look like post-Cold War with Russia, where they projected that things are going to become much more volatile, much more uncertain, way more complex and complicated, and much more ambiguous. And we believe that's the world that we live in today. I mean, think about it. Today is not going to be any slower than yesterday. It's not going to be any less volatile or uncertain or ambiguous. And the complexity of the things that we face every day, they're just becoming more and more complex. And sadly enough, and you can read this in our book, while the demand for cognitive ability, which helps us navigate complexity, is on the increase, our supply of cognitive as human beings is actually on the decrease. So we've got this gap in even our ability to deal with this VUCA world that we're living in today. And so we think about these leaders who are in these places trying to navigate this. We have a favorite quote that we like to use. This is from Erwin McManus. It says, "We have turned leadership into a domain of knowledge without ever paying attention to what it means to be human. If you're a leader, your expertise should not be in leadership. Your expertise should be humanity." We couldn't agree more with this statement. Leadership is all about people. I think what we've experienced the last 10, 20, 30 years is we chose to put results before people. And in reality, we have to put people before results. And if we do it effectively in the right way, actually we get better results if we put people first. So we think McManus's quote really kind of encapsulates that for us. We also believe there's a shift underway that has to take place in the mindset of the leader. And that is, there's kind of the old way we did things, like I do my day job. If I have time, I develop my team. And man, if I have anything left at the end, I'll maybe spend some time in my own development. I am shocked the number of leaders that I run into that don't invest in their own development. It's really amazing to me that we don't practice our practice. And what we're saying has to shift is there's a new way that says, look, I have to care for myself and I got to grow as a leader. And then I got to develop my people from that space. And then I got to figure out how to do my day job. And the reality of it is, if you can make that shift, your day job's going to become a lot simpler because you will have developed your team and the people around you. And we just happen to believe healthy leader, healthy team, and unhealthy leader, unhealthy team. So our health and well-being and growth as a leader really has to take priority.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So these 4 leadership challenges are some of the reasons that we run into time and time again when we talk about you have to develop yourself first and then develop your team. You really have to shift those priorities. As Bob already stated, our greatest competition is in the mind of the leader. And here's the 4 challenges that we run into time and time again. Leadership fatigue. We're tired sometimes because we're trying to solve for things that are complex, and we haven't quite shifted our mindset to learning how to navigate complexity versus solving it. We're tired because we're not caring for ourselves first. We just don't have, as you notice the picture of the mountain hiker in the last image, we just don't have enough oxygen to quite take our team all the way up because we're not caring for ourselves first. Time scarcity comes up time and time again. Leaders will say, I get it. These are the problems I need to solve. We need to do this, but I don't have the time. Well, the truth is, we have time for the things that are important to us. We all have the same amount of time that we're working with. It's how are we managing that time? What are we making a priority? And the other truth is, when we don't invest the time into development, our time is then stolen from us later when we're dealing with problems that came from the fact that we didn't first focus on development. There's the know-how scarcity. Many of our leaders will say, I just don't know how to do what you're proposing. Well, that's the very reason that we created systems, because we are about equipping leaders with the things that they need, the tools that they need to kind of defeat that know-how. And then if they're honest, the leaders that we talk to, when we look in their eyes, they're afraid. Look, most CEOs, there's recent articles we've read on this, that many CEOs, the thing that keeps them up at night is the fear of failure. And so if we can all just face that yes, there's a fear of failure and we're never going to get this perfect, we can begin to address these 4 leadership challenges. Bob, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Nicki. There was an interesting article written back in 2016 as part of a Harvard Business School article, and you can see the authors here on the screen. And they talked about this great training robbery that was happening in our country, and how you can see the quote here: overwhelming evidence shows that most companies are unable to transfer employee learning into change or improved financial performance. And that's exactly what we're talking about, right? Like, how does this translate into change for our people? And how does this translate into change for our organization? And ultimately, how does it create a better return on investment? And most of the research is indicating that the methodology that we have used in the past has not delivered. Secondly, there was an interesting article written by a number of people in this up at the top here, and why is it time to bring learning to the C-suite? We have a theory, and it's supported by a lot of research, that somehow at some point in the journey, leaders decided that the development of their people wasn't their priority. So they outsourced it. They outsourced it to human resource departments or learning and development parts of their organization if they're big enough, or even consultants like us, like, come in and develop our people for us. Well, what we're figuring out is that actually doesn't work. And that's part of the lack of the return on investment, of the great training robbery, is the previous article. This group went on to say, too, that one of the reasons that training hasn't worked in the past is we haven't made training personalized. It really needs to be personalized to the individual. It needs to be packaged in these little bite-sized formats or systems or little pieces that they can digest at a small amount of time. It needs to be incorporated into the daily work routine. So in other words, it's not about sending your people off to seminars for a day or two or whatever. That can give you content. But we know that most of the time when we come back from that stuff, we really haven't retained it, or we don't really put it into practice, because it needs to be supported with timely nudges and reminders. And so when you think about some content we're going to give you in a second here about our approach, you'll see some of the bits and pieces of kind of where this information falls in. So here are the 4 things that we believe about the leadership development space. First and foremost, it has to be led by the leader, and it has to be individually owned. So what does that mean? That means every leader's primary responsibility, if you have people reporting to you, is the development of yourself and that group of people. You don't have to worry about 200 people. You have to worry about the people that are reporting to you. Secondly, this means you own it as an individual. So the thing I hate to hear the most is, well, my boss just isn't into this. No, sorry, you still own your development. So you got to figure out an alternate path, right? And so leader-led and individually owned. Secondly, it has to be personalized in bite-sized pieces, and it has to occur in the flow of work. We can't take this and make it this burdensome thing that has to be all these things I have to go to outside of my normal job. That's why we built a system that can be learned over time, implemented over time, and done within the flow of work. Thirdly, it has to be seated in the one-on-one meeting, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. And then it has to be nourished over time. Some of you may know who John Maxwell is. He said leaders are born daily, just not in a day. And so it is a long-term process, but the one-on-one meeting is going to be at the core of our approach as well. And that is the one-on-one meeting between the employee and the supervisor and the employee. And then lastly, we have to prioritize context over content, and we always put data at the center. Part of our methodology is what we call the awareness matrix. And it's a data-based system that gives us a lot of information on how a person is wired, what's important to them, what they value. And so development has to start with that at the core. And so we have to learn things within the context of who we are, what the job requires, what the organization requires. This is not about academics. It's not about content. It's not about how many books you can read. It's about, what do I need to know to develop, be better at what I do, and add more value to the organization. So at the core of our entire system is what we call the clarity model. And you'll see here, it's really the overlap of 3 things: awareness, expectations, and feedback. Think of it this way. Think of the Reese's peanut butter cup, right? like you've got chocolate and peanut butter. And so for years, we've been doing development. Honestly, some of it probably not the best way with the greatest return on investment, because we fell into the same trap that pretty much everybody in our industry falls into. But we started to notice some things and some trends, and we noticed that these expectations are really important. And we noticed that developing awareness at a deeper level was important. And we saw that employees were wanting more and more feedback. It's interesting, some of you may have heard of some research that was done by Dr. Urich, and she talked about how 95% of people, according to her studies, think they're aware. And in reality, only 15% of them are. So there's a huge gap between how aware we think we are and our actual awareness. We teach awareness in 3 areas: self-awareness, others awareness, and situational awareness. And when we can develop a stronger muscle around our awareness of ourselves and the people around us and the situations we find ourselves in, our leadership effectiveness will go through the roof. Secondly, we know in relationship to expectations that the greatest source of frustration is an unmet expectation. So think about that for a second. The greatest source of frustration is often an unmet expectation. The question is, do people know my expectations? Do I know what's expected of me? Have we communicated those clearly? Are we in agreement on those? And lastly, feedback. You know, I grew up in a day and age where you were lucky to get an annual review. That just isn't sufficient anymore. And what most research is indicating today, that regardless of age, over half of employees would like feedback at least every 2 weeks. And can we just be honest for a second? Like, people want to know where they stand. They need to know where they stand, and they deserve to know where they stand. And if we're not giving them that type of feedback, that's something that has to change really in our leadership. So at the core of this is the clarity model. There are 5 systems underneath that called leading to the one, the awareness matrix, which I referenced a second ago, this thing about self-regulation and adaptation and how important that is. And then what we call the fit factor evaluation, or our fit factor assessment, which helps us determine fit with an employee in our organization and with a leader and with a team. And then also this data-centric development, that really everything that gets learned in the leadership space, we have to tie to our data, because otherwise it just won't stick. And we have a process to help our clients understand how to do that. Nicki, I'm going to turn it over to you for this picture.
Yeah, so you hear us use the word systems a lot. So I want you to think about when you were small and you learned to ride a bicycle for the first time. You needed help. Somebody put training wheels on it for you. Somebody held the back of the seat and they ran with you. It was exhausting for them, but they ran with you until one day you said, you know what? I've been practicing with these training wheels. You've been running with me. And I think today is the day that I'm going to take off the training wheels. And then you were off. You had the freedom. It just became so natural as walking. You were able to ride that bike without training wheels. We believe this is what systems do for leaders. They're like training wheels. And we're like the people holding on to the back of the seat while you're learning to incorporate these systems into the flow of your work, until developing yourself and others becomes as natural as walking or riding a bike. So this is a great image when you think about systems. That's why we've created systems. We think it's one of the missing pieces in the leadership development space. Bob, right back over to you.
So we mentioned that one of these systems within our framework is this leading to the one. And basically what that says is, remember back to awareness, expectations, and feedback. We elaborate on it a little bit more. It's about gaining deep awareness. It's about setting and receiving mutual expectations. And it's about giving and receiving developmental feedback. And remember, this is a two-way street. This just isn't from a supervisor down to an employee. It's from an employee up to a supervisor as well, because we have expectations of our leaders. We should have the right to give our leaders feedback on how they're doing. We need to develop greater awareness on this person that's leading me. And how do I work most effectively with this person? And we believe that at the core of that, and if you remember this from our 4 items in our approach, at the core of that is the one-on-one. And we call it the L21 interaction, leading to the one, L21. We think it's like a magnet. It draws these 3 things together. If you are not in a regular cadence of one-on-one meetings with the person you report to or the people that report to you, it really is impossible to gain these deeper levels of awareness and to really set these expectations and to give really what we call developmental feedback. It's not just feedback for the sake of feedback. It's feedback within the context of this is about the development of myself and this person I'm working with. So we believe that one-on-one is at the core. And the leading to the one system basically says it's the recognition that each person is unique and each supervisor-employee relationship is different, and it requires the leader to lead each person individually. People will hear me say over and over and over again when we do system implementation, being a dad for me was not hard. What was really hard is I have 4 sons, and being 4 different dads to 4 very unique sons was really difficult. How do you navigate that space? The same thing is true when we lead people. If I have 7 people reporting to me, I just don't get to show up and be Bob, and everybody has to adapt to Bob. I have to understand these 7 individuals and the unique relationship that I have with them and how this is going to work between this person and me. It seems like it takes a little bit of time and it will up front, but once you learn the system, like Nicki said, it's really the training wheels will come off and it just becomes second nature to you. Now, Nicki is a big gardener, so I'm going to turn this over to her and she'll explain what this image means.
Oh, this is my favorite image to talk about. Thank you, Bob. So when you think about understanding people and leading to the one, that's the key to the success of leading to the one, is that you understand yourself and you understand the people that you lead. The reason I like to use a garden analogy, because if anyone is familiar with gardening in any way, shape, or form, you know that you can take a good seed, you can put it in the ground, you can give it water, you can give it sunlight, but if you don't do anything else, that seed does not always reach its potential. If it's a tomato plant, maybe it grows and you get 20 tomatoes, but you had an expectation that that plant would produce 40 tomatoes. Well, you're going to be frustrated. And you may wonder, I gave you water, I gave you sunlight, what else did you need? Well, what we know to be true in gardening is the soil is the most important part. There's nutrients that every plant needs, and those nutrients are different for each plant. Some plants need more calcium while others need more nitrogen. People are the same way. So each of us individually, you as the leader and the people that you lead, you all have your own soil. That soil is where you will reach your potential, where you will find fulfillment and be really engaged producing at the rate or the level that you were created to produce. As we said earlier, your capacity, you will maximize that capacity that you have. So it's really important for me as the leader to understand what my needs are and what the needs are of the people that I lead that are in their soil, right? So when we think about needs, those are the nutrients that we feed the soil. We use data, people data, behavioral data, to understand what every person needs in order to reach their maximum capacity.
Thanks, Nicki. So this is some interesting information, and many of you are probably familiar with this from the Gallup organization. They've been tracking employee engagement or disengagement for decades now, and they estimate that those employees who are not engaged or actively disengaged cost the world about 7.8 trillion with a T in lost productivity. They estimate that to be north of $1 trillion here in the United States. Gallup believes that the future's top workplaces will rely on manager development. This is all going to come down to how we lead and coach the people that report to us. It's interesting that in the US and Canada, only about a third, and that number is actually, I think, dropped a little bit recently, of employees are engaged in their work. And you kind of got to ask yourself the question, like, why? So Nicki and I heard a podcast that Jim Clifton, I think he's now maybe the chairman of the CEO of Gallup. He's kind of at the end of his career. And he was sharing in this podcast how he was kind of frustrated by all the work that Gallup has put into this engagement issue in this country and the resources that they've provided. And he said, it's just sometimes it feels like CEOs don't get it. Like they don't get what they can do to fix this problem. And so he was at the office recently and he was walking down the hallway and he happened to see the person that I would kind of call their chief scientist behind all their surveys and assessments and data analysis and all of that. And he stopped just to have a conversation with the person. And he was telling them his frustration of all the money we put into this and all the work and everything. It just doesn't seem to be working. And this chief scientist said, "Oh, I can tell you how to solve that." And Clifton was like, "Well, yeah, please do." And he said, "Oh, it's just one meaningful interaction per week between an employee and a person that reports to them. One meaningful conversation a week between a supervisor and an employee." And he says that it would fix everything. So you can see why we're putting so much emphasis on this particular area of these interactions. What we call them, these leading to the one interactions. They're not all going to be formal. Some of them will be. Most of them will be very informal. We'll hit on 3 areas, from not just the transactional stuff of our job, but some of the relational stuff, and obviously some of the developmental things that we need to be working on. There's 3 different parts to that. And we've laid this all out in the book for you to be able to read and start to implement yourself or within your organization. And I'm going to close with this diagram here. And you see this river coming down this mountain. And on the left-hand side, you see the words hire and interact and understand. And I think companies like ours and organizations, we've done a pretty good job of understanding how to hire people better and who we're looking for and how to interact with them and maybe how to understand them at a deeper level. And, we do team building stuff and we understand our employees and each other. And that's all really good. It's not that that stuff's bad. But when you think about the fact that only about a third of the employees in this country are engaged in their work, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why is that the case? And here's our answer. Very simply, we believe that leaders have not been taught how to engage with other people. Now, some of you that are hearing this will go, well, that's not true for me. And that's because there are a handful of people, probably a small percentage, who intuitively understand how to do this. That most of us get so wrapped up around our work and we get so busy running on that hamster wheel, we're not really engaged. We may be interacting with our people. We may actually be understanding them, but we're not truly engaged. And so we define what that looks like, because until you're really engaged, it's hard to go to the next step. And if you look at the next step up that mountain, that is the development space. Like once I'm engaged with this person, now we can begin the development process. And we can promise you, if you'll walk down that trail, you will end up with much more fulfilled employees. Frankly, you'll be more fulfilled as a leader at the same time. Your people will be more engaged. We won't even be doing engagement surveys because we will be working on the solution to the problem. So think about this and think about walking across or walking through that river. We did not build you a bridge, and we didn't build you a bridge for a reason. It's because it's not as easy as a stroll across a bridge. It's actually about deciding to get into these rapids, ford your way through this river, do the hard work, roll up your sleeves, invest in yourself, invest in your people, and you will see a change. If not, then my caution to you is you're probably going to end up looking like that bridge in Honduras after the hurricane. You'll have your way, you'll have your style, you'll do it the way that you do it, and at some point you'll become irrelevant. And so this is kind of the opportunity to rethink, as we said, not learning something new. This is about you becoming a new type of leader where you can engage with your people and begin that development process.
All right, so here's our takeaways that we promised as we wrap this up today. If you already have a leadership development program or it's something you're working on in your organization, we would, of course, love to chat with you and feel free to reach out. But if that's not an option, you need to evaluate these 4 things at a minimum. And we're going to send these to you in an email as a follow-up. So don't worry about writing them down or trying to memorize them. But you need to ask yourself, does my leadership development program address real challenges that leaders are facing? We gave you 4 of those today. Are we giving our leaders systems that can be applied, or is it focused on content alone? Remember, systems need to be applied in the flow of work. Is it led and exemplified by senior leaders? This is key. If your senior leaders are not exemplifying your program or your leadership development initiatives, it's not likely to succeed. They have to be fully bought in. Is your organization taking a long game approach? Remember, true development, we're talking about human development, people development. It takes a long-term commitment. It means you're going to make small changes that stick over a long period of time. It's not about learning something new. Like Bob said, it's about becoming a new type of leader. And finally, is the content personalized or is it presented in a vacuum? And again, we believe data is the best way. People data, behavioral data is the best way to begin to personalize the content that's being presented. And then finally, we're going to just send you a few resources straight from our Leading to the One book and our clarity-based leadership system, a few resources that may help you get started. We wanted to give that to you as a thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure allowing us to present this information to you. Please reach out to any of us at Integrate if you have any questions at all. Thank you so much.